Hey guys, it's Raul, and today I'm sharing with you a very overdue video, and that is the books that I read my last semester in school. So my last semester in school was not this past semester that just ended in May or June. It was actually in December, and I read a ton of books because I took a YA literature course back in my last semester before I graduated in December, and I never actually talked about any of the books that I read that last semester in school. I've kind of mentioned a few books here and there in passing, but I've been meaning to make this video for a long time and just haven't had the energy to sit down and do it. But I am doing this today. I am finally sitting down and sharing with you guys all of the books that I read my last semester in my YA literature course, which I read 11 books in that class my last semester. Most of them I ended up absolutely loving. So yes, I'm going to share those with you guys today. I'm going to try my best to give you as many thoughts as I can on these books. It's been a long time since I've read any of these. Some of these I can't remember a lot about. So yes, I will do my best. Let's just go ahead and get started. So the first book we read in my YA Lit course was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is a classic young adult literature, adolescent literature book that a lot of people are familiar with. It follows our four main characters, the March sisters, and kind of their lives, story of their lives growing up as girls in the 19th century. And, you know, everything that happens revolves around them. I absolutely love how this book kind of is split into two parts. You get the first half of it, which follows them in kind of like their young lives, young teenagers, and then the second half follows them as they're growing up and getting married and having children and everything that revolves around them. I really ended up loving this book. This was my first exposure to Little Women, and yes, I was just really excited to pick it up. I was going in it a little bit scared because it was written so long ago that I wouldn't, be able to kind of get into the book because of the writing, but this is surprisingly accessible for being a classic. And yes, I was just really happy that I finally got to read this one and get exposed to this story that a lot of people have read and heard about, and I'm not really going to talk too much about, but yes, this was a wonderful read that I'm just so happy that we ended up reading finally. And then we read a book that was somewhat connected to Little Women, and it's not technically adolescent literature or YA literature, but that is March by Geraldine Brooks. And this one we were given to read because it actually follows the story of Mr. March in Little Women while he's away at war. So you guys know, for those of you who have read Little Women, know that at one point the father goes off to war, and this book kind of follows his story of, what could have possibly happened to Mr. March while he was away at war. It follows a little bit of his background and his youth, and then follows his time at war before he comes back to his family. And this was an absolutely amazing read. I'm so glad that our professor made us read this. If you guys are, fans of Little Women and you guys want a little bit more of, story of, what could have possibly happened to Mr. March. This is kind of, glorified fan fiction, but wonderful fan fiction at the same time. So, I definitely recommend you guys picking this up because it follows our, Mr. March and kind of when he comes back from war and kind of all of the traumas and psychological things that, he's going through after having experienced all of these things off at war and having to come back to be a husband and a father and pretend like everything is normal when things are not. And it's absolutely wonderful and amazing. It's super short, so I definitely recommend this if you guys enjoy Little Women and want to kind of get more perspective and more background on some of the characters. This is definitely a must read. And after reading some classics, we jumped into our historical fiction section of our class. The first book that we read was The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano by Sonia Manzano, and this follows our main character, Evelyn Serrano, obviously, in Spanish Harlem in the 1960s as they're kind of, fighting the power and, creating a revolution because they, this is a community that at this time was very oppressed and, not being really taken care of by the government or not being taken seriously because it was, composed of a lot of Puerto Ricans and people of color and different cultures, so they weren't really receiving the respect that they, needed as human beings. So this follows that story of just people kind of rising up to demand the respect that they deserve as human beings, and I feel like this was an absolutely wonderful story. Another short book that I felt was just very important to read. It follows, Puerto Ricans, which I'm Puerto Rican, so I was able to connect with the culture as well as they're kind of, demanding this respect and wanting to be treated as people. This was another fantastic book. I'm so glad that we ended up reading it, and I'm glad that, my culture was represented through this book as well, and I was able personally to learn things that my people went through that I wasn't familiar with, so I'm very glad that I read this one. And then we read Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wayne. This is a World War II historical fiction that follows our two main characters who are both pilots and spies, so this kind of follows somewhat of, you know, true events or inspired by true events, and it highlights kind of this little known aspect in history that, you know, there were women pilots and women spies back in World War II, which a lot of people don't know about. I didn't really know about, and, you know, it's highlighted in this book about these women pilots and women spies that, you know, fought in World War II, and I thought this was another great book. This is one that I'd listened to on audiobook, and because I was rushing to get it done before a deadline, I didn't get as much out of the book as I wanted to, so this is one that I'm probably going to end up rereading at one point, because there are companion novels that go, you know, that go with this book. But yeah, I felt like this was, from what I can remember, a great book, very exciting, very exhilarating. There was, you know, a little bit of a mystery going on with one of the main characters that you get to know more about as the story progresses. And yes, I am, again, glad that we read this book. This is, you know, our professor picked a lot of great books to kind of really expand our knowledge of YA literature, so I'm glad that we read another great historical fiction novel, because I do really enjoy historical fiction, and this was another great addition to our reading list for that semester. And then we moved on to fantasy and science fiction section. The first book that we read in that section was Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. This is one that's well known, I feel like, here on BookTube. Maggie Stiefvater is an author that is very well known here on BookTube as well. This is a standalone book that follows our two main characters, Puck and Sean, in this kind of futuristic dystopian world, somewhat of, where these water horses come out every year from the water, and these trainers get to ride these water horses and compete in these races to win, you know, prestige and money and all of this kind of stuff. So yes, this is another wonderful Maggie Stiefvater book. I've only read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, and I've actually read it twice. Really enjoy her writing. This kind of has a similar style to Maggie Stiefvater's writing. If you guys enjoy her writing, I feel like you will enjoy this one as well. And I like that this is a standalone, and it was just very well done. At some points it was just very brutal and gruesome, and I really enjoy that in my YA literature, where there's kind of like, you know, a little bit of darkness and of brutality, and I just like really ended up loving the story in the end. It wasn't my favorite by Maggie Stiefvater. I think I gave this like a 4 out of 5 stars or so. It wasn't a 5-star read for me, but still a really, really enjoyable read, and a really fun read that I felt like we didn't feel like we were doing work when we were reading this book, because it was a lot of fun to read. And then we read Little Brother by Cory Doctorow, which is probably my least favorite book that we read that entire semester, because this follows this group of kids that are fighting this society where, you know, it's futuristic. There's this kind of terrorist attack dependent on technology, and there's all these different technological advances where people don't really have privacy because of technology, and they're fighting these people that are kind of trying to destroy this world or whatever. I don't really remember tons of this book. I just remember vaguely, you know, a couple details here and there, but this was, like I said again, my least favorite book out of all of them. I just feel like because it was written back in 2008, a lot of the references to technology and everything just feel so dated. Like, everything in this book felt so dated. I feel like if I would have read this book when it came out in 2008, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. But reading it 10 years later, it was just, no. I don't know. It just felt very dated. And I feel a lot of the people in class also felt the same way. It was very long to begin with. And then feeling dated was just wasn't really motivating us to pick it up. There was a lot of info dumping with a lot of technological mumbo jumbo and lingo that just like a normal reader, I feel like, wouldn't really grasp. So there were a lot of things going over my head and going over a lot of our heads, because it was just like a lot of technical computerized mumbo jumbo that we just like wasn't really adding to the story. So, and it wasn't really explained very well, so it just kind of, it was bogging everything down. So yeah, I don't know, didn't really enjoy this one. I believe there's a sequel to it, which I'm not going to read. So yeah, this is again my least favorite one that we read out of the class, but I still gave it like a 2.5, 3 stars or so. So it wasn't bad, it just wasn't for me. Then the last section that we moved to in this class was for the contemporary literature side. We read 4 books in contemporary literature, which I'm very excited because I loved all of these books. The first one was The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith, and this follows our main character Eden, who her freshman year in high school is sexually abused, and it kind of follows the rest of her years in high school and kind of as she changes as a person. You know, she hasn't said anything to anybody. She's kind of keeping all of these things internalized, how she is changed as a person, how she's trying to cope with it and isn't really you know, dealing with all of this very well, and how she's on kind of this destructive path because she hasn't been able to say anything to anybody, because she hasn't, you know, had the courage to say anything, and she kind of keeps all of this inside and bottled in, and she kind of lashes out slowly at people, at friends and family, and how this kind of, you know, one situation kind of destroys or affects the rest of her high school year. You know, this was a very strong book at times to read. It was very hard to read at times, to kind of see how this main character kind of coped with these things, and from other experiences, stuff that I've heard from other people, how it can be very true to life, how a lot of the emotions and the things that Eden was thinking and feeling, some people actually think and feel this way after going through this kind of traumatic experience. So this was, again, a very important book, I feel like, to read. They substituted this book for Speak. Normally they would teach on Speak in the class, which, you know, was deals with also sexual abuse. So the teacher, you know, professor this time around wanted to switch it up and teach The Way I Used to Be when it came to, you know, sexual abuse and this kind of topic. And I feel like this was also a great choice to kind of delve into this topic and get us talking about sexual abuse and how people respond to sexual abuse, and, you know, whether we should say something or not, or how we should come out and say things that, you know, have traumatized us in our lives. Another great book that I highly recommend if you guys are able to, you know, read this kind of book without getting triggered. I definitely recommend it. And then we read Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This follows our main character named Asa, who is struggling with anxiety and OCD, and we get a lot of kind of internal struggle between her and her mind, and what she wants to do and what her mind is kind of telling her to do with all of this OCD. And I believe this is somewhat own voices, because John Green also struggles with OCD and anxiety, so he put a lot of his thoughts and feelings into this main character Asa. And I feel like this was another great John Green read. If you guys enjoy John Green, I feel like this is going to be another great book that you will enjoy, because it's in, you know, same John Green fashion of writing style, and kind of, you know, in his contemporaries and stuff that I really enjoy. So this is another one that I feel like if you guys are able to read and aren't triggered by this, you know, by anxiety and OCD and stuff, this is another one that I highly recommend. I didn't love the ending as much as I wanted to. I know there, you know, John Green kind of struggles a little bit sometimes with endings. I don't really end up loving them so much, but I feel like it's another one that's very realistic. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's very realistic, and I really ended up enjoying this one anyways. And then we read a book that a ton of people have read. I feel like this is required reading in so many high schools nowadays, and that is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. You guys know about this book. It is inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and follows our main character named Star, and it follows the story of her friend is shot by a white police officer, and he's black, and it's kind of, you know, society dealing with everything, how this friend is being portrayed in the media, what his true story is, how people in the black community feel. It's an absolutely amazing book. Highly recommend it. Definitely need to read it if you guys have not read it, which I feel like at this point everybody has read this book. Yeah, definitely check this one out. It is an amazing, amazing read, and I'm not going to get into more details about it because I feel like everybody at this point knows about this story. We read The Lines We Cross by Rhonda Adele Fatah. This follows our two main characters, Mina and Michael. Mina is Muslim. Michael is Australian. He's white. Michael's father is actually the leader of kind of this group who doesn't really love Muslims as much as everybody else, and they're kind of, you know, it's kind of this supremacist group where they don't admit to be a supremacist group or being racist, but they really are. You know, they think that they're doing everything for the greater good of their country and their communities, and it's just like, no, it's a supremacist group. So yeah, it's following Michael and Mina as they're kind of falling in love, and Michael kind of, you know, getting his own opinions and having the strength to go against his family who believes these things against, you know, this other group of people and their religion, and, you know, wanting to kind of form his own opinions and struggling with, you know, having these parents that think this way, and following Mina's story as she's being viewed negatively because she wears a hijab, and how, you know, her family is being portrayed in this society. And it's just another absolutely wonderful book that, again, deals with a lot of these, you know, racial prejudiced viewpoints that a lot of people in our society today still struggle with. I feel like this is definitely still going to be a relevant book and a relevant story, for years to come, because unfortunately people still think this way. We're still seeing prejudice in our, in our society every day, and racism and everything. So this is a book that I feel like will definitely still have something to say in following years. And then the last book that I read was actually an assignment, my final assignment. So everybody in our class was given a different book to read, and we had to present, our topics at the end of the semester and talk about the importance of this book and how it was important, to incorporate in YA literature, why we recommend it, and that kind of thing. So my kind of category was fantasy, and within fantasy, I ended up choosing The Bonus Mercies by April Genevieve Tucholke. This is a loose feminist retelling of Beowulf that follows our four main characters who are called the Bonus Mercies, and they're a group of mercy killers in this world. People can contract or hire mercy killers to come and take care of the sick and the dying and the elderly and stuff who, obviously don't, want to continue to live in their situations or whatever situations they're in. They can contract the mercies to kind of perform a mercy killing for them. And yeah, so eventually, it's obviously a dark premise, but eventually kind of these four girls, some of them don't feel comfortable doing this job anymore, and they don't, they really want to get out of mercy killing. So at one point, there is a monster kind of attacking this village that they hear of, and they're told that if, whoever is able to get rid of this monster will be rewarded with lots of riches from the king of this country. So the Bonus Mercies, this group of girls, they take this as an opportunity to go out, kill this monster, and be able to get enough, money to get out of mercy killing. So they go on this journey to go slay this monster, and yes, and just, be rewarded with these riches so they don't have to do mercy killings to live. This is an absolutely amazing book. I love this one. I don't know why more people don't talk about this book. Like I said, it's very loosely based on Beowulf, but there are a lot of little nuances here and there that if you are familiar with the story of Beowulf, I feel like you're really going to love kind of seeing those similarities to Beowulf within the story, although this does definitely feel like its own story. It doesn't feel like a straight up retelling, which is great. It's just inspired by that legend of Beowulf, and I loved it. At the one point they meet this group of witches, and there's this huge witch war that they are referring to, which I'm very excited to read about in future novels, because this is, I think it's supposed to be a series or a series of standalone. So I'm really excited to see kind of how April Genevieve Tucholke ends up addressing the whole witch wars kind of storyline that's going on in here, because I wanted to know more. This is a short book for a fantasy, so it leaves you wanting more, although it in the end leaves you pretty much satisfied. There's so many kind of open questions that you still have at the end of it, where I just hope April Genevieve Tucholke ends up addressing in future books. She's already announced the next companion novel in this series, which I'm super, super excited about. So yes, loved this book. Obviously 5 out of 5 stars if you guys can't tell at this point. I'm just super, super excited that I got to read this book for this YA class, because it did not feel like I was doing work at all. I loved reading this. I loved doing the presentation for this at the end. And yes, I highly recommend this one. If you guys like kind of historical fantasy retellings, this is one that I highly recommend. I loved April Genevieve Tucholke's writing style. It was absolutely wonderful. So yeah, guys, that is it for all of the books that I read my last semester in school. Comment down below. Let me know if you guys have read any of these. What kind of books did you guys need to read in school, if they were as fun as the books that I got to read? So yes, let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys all again for watching, and I will see you all next time.